I'm Eric Quam. I'm going to talk with you about regenerative decision making. If you bear with me to the end of this video, you will learn how regenerative decision making supplies the foundation for a new multi-billion-dollar industry providing regenerative decision making services to decision makers everywhere. I'm here to talk with you about regenerative decision making because the planet's finite and life-sustaining biosphere, represented here by a lush tropical rainforest, needs saving from something that biologist Paul Ehrlich called the human enterprise. I chose this image of the North Alberta tar sands to represent the life-damaging operation of the human enterprise within the planet's biosphere. What is the human enterprise? The human enterprise is the sum of all the human decisions to extract things from the biosphere. Things like forests, fresh water, wildlife, soils, and minerals that I will call the things we extract. Plus, all the flows of all those things we extract. Things like forests, fresh water, wildlife, soils, and minerals from the biosphere and into the human enterprise. Plus, all the human decisions to use all those things we extract in the forms of energy, water, materials and chemicals, food and fiber, and manufactures and structures that I will call the things we use. Plus, the flows of all those things we use. Things like energy, water, materials and chemicals, food and fiber, and manufactures and structures within the human enterprise. Plus, the flows of pollution from all those things we use from the human enterprise back into the biosphere. The exponential growth of the human enterprise has reached a point where the exponential damage to the biosphere from the human enterprise is outstripping the biosphere's capacity to regenerate itself. This exponential damage to the biosphere's regenerative capacity is showing up as multiple global ecological crises. The exponential damage to the biosphere from the extraction flows of the human enterprise are showing up as global crises of freshwater depletion and drought, global crises of deforestation and expanding deserts, and global crises of species extinctions and collapsing ecosystems. The exponential damage to the biosphere from the pollution flows of the human enterprise are showing up as global crises of climate change, causing massive heat waves, melting glaciers, and rising sea levels, global crises of synthetic homicidal pollutants such as herbicides, pesticides, and microplastics, global crises of ozone depletion and life-destroying UV radiation, global crises of dust, smoke, and sulfates creating unbreathable air, global crises of ocean acidification and dying coral reefs, and global crises of phosphorus and nitrogen pollutants creating dead zones in rivers and coastal seas. Because the exponentially growing human enterprise is creating these global ecological crises, reversing these crises might look like exponentially scaling back the human enterprise, allowing the biosphere to regenerate itself and allowing the regenerated biosphere to reverse the global ecological crises and save the planet. If saving the planet looks like exponentially scaling back the human enterprise, what might a decision to scale back the human enterprise look like? Such a decision might look like a decision made by a group of decision makers to adopt an option, such as a things we extract option or a things we use option that scales back the human enterprise. What might such a group of decision makers look like? They might look like this group of decision makers. These are the people at Kauai Island Utility Cooperative in the state of Hawaii who have made and are making the decisions to adopt renewable energy options for the achievement of 100% renewable energy. If we return to the question, what might a decision to scale back the human enterprise look like? Such a decision might look like a decision-making group like the people at KIUC who make a decision to adopt an option like a renewable energy option that scales back the fossil fuel extraction flows from the biosphere into the human enterprise and scales back the fossil fuel pollution flows from the human enterprise back into the biosphere. Going forward, I'm going to use the term regenerative option to describe an option like a renewable energy option that scales back the extraction flows and or the pollution flows of the human enterprise and allows the Earth's biosphere to regenerate itself. What is a regenerative option? A regenerative option is either an option that takes less things we extract from the biosphere. That is, it takes less things like forests, fresh water, wildlife, soils, and minerals from the biosphere, or it's a things we use option, like an energy option, a water option, a materials option, a food option, or a manufacturer's option that puts less pollution into the biosphere. Less extraction or less pollution makes an option regenerative because less extraction and less pollution allow the biosphere to regenerate itself. That lessened extraction, measured by an increase in the number of species in an area, can be called a regeneration benefit of a things we extract option. That lessened pollution, measured by an option avoiding more pollution than it incurs, can be called a regeneration benefit of a things we use option. Just because an option delivers regeneration benefits does not mean that decision makers will want to adopt it. If a regenerative option does not meet a human physical need for food, for water, for heat, for shelter, for transport, decision makers are not going to want to adopt it. Similarly, if a regenerative option that meets a physical need costs more money than a non-regenerative option that meets that same need, decision makers are not going to want to adopt the regenerative option. If we want decision makers to adopt regenerative options, we want them to persuade themselves of two things. First, we want them to persuade themselves that the regenerative option meets a human physical need. In other words, the regenerative option has to work. It has to perform. It has to deliver nutritious food or drinkable water or a habitable building or safe transportation or electric power of the correct voltage. If a regenerative option meets a human physical need, if it works, if it performs, it can be said to deliver performance benefits. If a regenerative option does not deliver performance benefits, decision makers are not going to want to adopt it. Second, if we want decision makers to adopt regenerative options, we want them to persuade themselves that the regenerative option avoids more costs than it incurs. In other words, the regenerative option has to deliver cost savings compared to the non-regenerative option that's currently in use. If the regenerative option avoids more costs than it incurs, it can be said to deliver economic benefits. If the regenerative option does not deliver economic benefits, decision makers are not going to want to adopt it. To recap, a regenerative option that decision makers want to adopt is an option that delivers performance benefits because it meets a human physical need. delivers economic benefits because it avoids more costs than it incurs, and delivers regeneration benefits because it's a things we extract option that increases the number of species in an area, or delivers regeneration benefits because it's a things we use option that avoids more pollution than it incurs.
Let's look at two examples of regenerative options that deliver performance, economic, and regeneration benefits. A first example is a regenerative option called rewilding. Rewilding is a things we extract option for extracting nothing from a given area and instead allowing the area to regenerate or rewild itself. A rewilding option delivers performance benefits because it meets human physical needs for the clean air, fresh water, and wildlife regenerated by the rewilded area. At the 1,400 hectare Knepp Castle estate in England, adoption of rewilding options has allowed the land to regenerate clean air, fresh water, and nutritious foods to meet humans' physical needs. A rewilding option delivers economic benefits because it avoids more costs than it incurs. At the rewilded Knepp Castle estate in England, a combination of rewilding and regenerative grazing options has delivered economic benefits because the avoided costs of equipment and fertilizer to grow feed crops for an industrial dairy were more than the incurred costs of allowing heirloom livestock breeds, such as English longhorn cattle, to graze and fertilize the rewilded land. A rewilding option delivers regeneration benefits because it increases the number of species in the area that is being allowed to rewild and regenerate itself. At the Knepp Castle estate, rewilding has delivered regeneration benefits through proliferation of soil, plant, and animal species, including storks that have nested in England for only the second time in 600 years. A second example of a regenerative option is a solar water heater. A solar water heater is a things we use option that uses solar energy and avoids using electricity to heat water for human uses. A solar water heater delivers performance benefits because it meets human physical needs for hot water. A solar water heater delivers economic benefits because it avoids more costs of the electricity that it avoids using to heat water than it incurs to make and operate the solar water heater. A solar water heater delivers regeneration benefits because it avoids 5 times more pollution from the electricity that it avoids using to heat water than it incurs to make and operate the solar water heater. Now, here's the secret about regenerative options. We have plenty of regenerative options. Paul Hawkins' Project Drawdown showed that we have available to us right now 91 kinds of regenerative options that, when widely adopted, could yield more than $97 trillion of avoided costs and more than 1 trillion tons of avoided carbon pollution. Since we have plenty of regenerative options that could avoid more than $97 trillion of economic costs and avoid more than 1 trillion tons of carbon pollution, why are decision makers not yet adopting these regenerative options at the exponential rate that is needed to scale back the human enterprise and save the planet? To answer that question, let's look at present-day decision-making for adopting options that meet human physical needs.
Present-day decision-making is a simple 3-step process. First, decision makers perceive a present physical need. Second, decision makers shop for an option that meets that present need. Third, decision makers adopt an option that meets that present need at lowest incurred cost. Present-day decision making cannot save the planet for 2 reasons. First, present-day decision-making contains no process for appreciating the regeneration benefits and avoided cost benefits of regenerative options. Without appreciation of avoided pollution benefits, increased number of species benefits and avoided cost benefits, decision makers are not going to persuade themselves to adopt regenerative options. Second, present-day decision-making adopts options at an incremental rate to meet present physical needs and contains no process for adopting regenerative options at an exponential rate. Without such an exponential process, decision makers are not going to adopt regenerative options at the exponential rate needed to save the planet. Putting these reasons together, present-day decision-making is not a process for adopting regenerative options at the exponential rate needed to scale back the human enterprise and save the planet. Present-day decision-making is keeping all of us stuck on an unlimited downside of exponentially growing pollution flows, exponentially growing species extinctions, and exponentially growing incurred costs of adapting to the multiple global ecological crises. The red area in this figure shows the unlimited downside from the exponentially growing pollution flows, exponentially growing species extinctions, and exponentially growing incurred costs of present-day decision-making.
If present-day decision-making doesn't work and cannot work to save the planet, what might a decision-making process look like for adopting regenerative options at the exponential rate that is needed to save the planet?
A regenerative decision-making process might look like a process that's implementable by a group of decision makers, like the people at Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, who make decisions to adopt options like renewable energy options that meet human physical needs. A regenerative decision-making process implemented by such a group of decision makers might look like a decision-making loop through which decision makers adopt regenerative options at the exponential rate needed to save the planet. First, such a decision-making loop might look like decision makers identifying options and evaluating their performance, economic, and regeneration benefits, comparing their benefits, and persuading themselves what options they want to adopt. Second, decision makers persuading themselves what options they want to adopt might look like decision makers adopting a regenerative option and delivering its performance, economic, and regeneration benefits. Third, decision makers delivering those benefits might look like decision makers measuring the regenerative options delivered benefits and enthused to deliver more benefits faster. Fourth, decision makers enthused to deliver more benefits faster might look like decision makers enthused to persuade themselves faster to adopt more regenerative options. Decision makers enthused to persuade themselves faster to adopt more regenerative options might look like decision makers making more decisions faster to adopt more regenerative options. Decision makers making more decisions faster to adopt more regenerative options might look like decision makers adopting more regenerative options faster and delivering more benefits faster, which might look like decision makers measuring delivered benefits and enthused to deliver more benefits even faster. which might look like decision makers enthused to persuade themselves even faster to adopt more regenerative options, which might look like decision makers making even more decisions even faster to adopt more regenerative options, which might look like decision makers adopting even more regenerative options even faster and delivering even more benefits even faster. The faster and faster decision making creates the exponential adoption of more and more regenerative options. That faster and faster decision making to exponentially adopt more and more regenerative options is what makes regenerative decision making an exponential process for saving the planet. Through decision makers' exponential adoption of more and more regenerative options, regenerative decision-making processes deliver an unlimited upside, shown by the green area in this figure, of exponentially growing avoided cost benefits, exponentially growing avoided pollution benefits, and exponentially growing numbers of species per area benefits. Project Drawdown estimated this green area to have a value of more than $97 trillion of avoided costs and more than 1 trillion tons of avoided carbon pollution. Regenerative decision-making processes exponentially scale back the human enterprise, which allows the planet's biosphere to regenerate itself, which allows the regenerated biosphere to reverse the global ecological crises and save the planet.
To recap, I've shared with you
a regenerative decision-making process implementable by any group of decision makers anywhere for exponentially adopting more and more regenerative options. The faster and faster decision making to exponentially adopt more and more regenerative options delivers an unlimited upside of exponentially growing avoided cost benefits, exponentially growing avoided pollution benefits, and exponentially growing numbers of species per area benefits. The faster and faster decision making to exponentially adopt more and more regenerative options exponentially scales back the human enterprise, which allows Earth's biosphere to regenerate itself and allows the planet's regenerated biosphere to reverse the global ecological crises and save the planet.
Before saying aloha, I'd like to share with you a blueprint for a new information services industry called Regenerative Decision-Making Services.
And here it is. Regenerative decision-making services supply decision makers with the information that decision makers demand to gain greatest benefits from their adoption of regenerative options. Regenerative decision-making services include helping decision makers identify their options, helping decision makers evaluate the performance, economic, and regeneration benefits of their options, helping decision makers compare those benefits, helping decision makers make plans for what options they want to adopt now or might want to adopt later to deliver greatest benefits, helping decision makers create procurement processes to ensure the delivery of those benefits, and helping decision makers measure their delivered benefits. Let's look again at the figure showing the $97 trillion upside of investments in regenerative decision-making processes. I draw your attention to the tiny red sliver labeled investments in regenerative decision-making processes. That red sliver represents the time and money that decision makers will need to invest in regenerative decision-making processes to gain that $97 trillion upside. That red sliver is a cost for decision makers, but for providers of regenerative decision-making services, that red sliver is revenue. How much revenue might we be talking about in that little red sliver? If the avoided cost benefits of regenerative options are more than $97 trillion as estimated by Project Drawdown, and if decision makers are willing to invest as much as $1 in regenerative decision-making services to gain $100 of those avoided cost benefits, then that little red sliver might look like a $970 billion market for regenerative decision-making services. To put that $970 billion market in context, the market capitalization for Google, the world's third largest provider of information services, is about $980 billion. In other words, regenerative decision-making services has the potential to be an information services industry on a par with Google. Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete."
You don't save the planet by fighting present-day decision-making. To save the planet, you build a new model called regenerative decision-making that makes present-day decision-making obsolete. You give people a tool called regenerative decision-making, the use of which will lead people to new ways of thinking for saving the planet. Do you want to be part of something really big? Through regenerative decision-making, we can save the planet.
I'm grateful for your kind attention. Mahalo and aloha.